Starry River, Chapter 16. Rindy walked down the shady side of the twisted street. Even the scant protection of the shadows was welcome in the searing sun. "I'll just get some water at the half-moon well, and then I'll pack up my things at the inn and leave," he thought. The swinging sound of his mended buckets on his new carrying stick echoed against the crumbling stones of the empty ruins. However, the ruins were not completely empty. In front of him, Rindy saw a figure at the half-moon well. As he drew closer, he recognized Mr. Shan. He was on his knees, gazing into the well. "Mr. Shan," Rindy said, putting his buckets down, "what are you doing here?" Mr. Shan did not seem to hear him, and continued to look into the well. Rindy saw the toad, also at the well's edge, its bulging eyes gazing into the hole. Rindy kneeled beside them and tried to see what they were looking at. All he saw was darkness and the slight shimmer of light deep on the water. "Is something wrong with the half-moon well?" Rindy asked. "Half-moon? It's not half-moon. It was not a half-moon," Mr. Shan murmured, as if he hadn't heard. "It was a full moon. I needed a full moon to see." And still, without looking at Rindy, Mr. Shan put his hands on the wall that split the well in half, and pushed down with a surprising force. Crack! Crack! The remains of the dividing wall crumbled and fell. Dry dust misted up into the air like steam, and the splashing noises of rocks falling filled the air. When all was quiet, the well was a round circle. Rindy's mouth was also a round circle. He had struck that same wall with all his might, cracking his stick and breaking his buckets. And all his efforts had not even loosened a single stone. Yet Mr. Shan knocked it down with a single push of his wrinkled, aged hands. But Mr. Shan did not seem to be aware that he had done anything extraordinary. He peered again into the well. The reflections on the dark water sparkled up beams of light. The toad croaked a groan. "Did you drop something down there?" Rindy asked, after taking a deep breath and hiding his surprise. "No, it's not in this water," Mr. Shan said, his eyes clouding over. "It's in a different water." "He's confused again," Rindy thought, and before he could be annoyed, he remembered Madame Chang's patient smile. "Mr. Shan," Rindy said, more gently than he had ever had before, "I don't think there's anything in there." Mr. Shan put the toad in his pocket and pushed himself up with his walking stick. "Yes, now there's nothing," he said, nodding in his absent-minded way. "Don't jump in." "Don't worry," Rindy mused. "I won't." Mr. Shan's eyes seemed to clear, and he peered at Rindy, the power of his gaze hitting Rindy like a falling stone. Rindy's smile faded, and a strange, discomforting feeling came over him, as if he had walked into a gray, clammy mist. "Good," Mr. Shan said, nodding. He gently patted Rindy's shoulder. "Make sure you do as you say." And then Mr. Shan turned away. Rindy stared at Mr. Shan, slowly shuffling away, and looking as ancient and as feeble as he always did. Rindy looked back at the well. A cold, icy wind seemed to blow through him. Suddenly, he had a vision of something, a dark green blur, leaping into the gaping hole of the well. Angry roars echoing upward. Rindy shivered, then shook himself. The hot summer sun shone down, and its bright yellow light burned away any imaginings. He began to gather the water, which now, with Patrician gone, he was able to do faster than he'd ever had been before. However, when Rindy returned to his room at the inn, he still felt the weight of Mr. Shan's word. "Make sure you do as you say." Rindy had said that he would tell a story for Madame Chang. They had an agreement. If he left now, he would be a liar and a cheater, like my father. Rindy thought, and the sinking sun cast a dark shadow on his face. Finally, he opened his drawers and took out his belongings, carefully folding them into his plain cloth bag. His last item was a smooth blue and white rice bowl. It was thin and delicate, with faint traces of gold paint and a fineness that stood out in the poorness of his surroundings. Cupping it in his hands, Rindy gazed silently for a long moment. "Why not?" he said. Chapter 17. Rindy set down the chopsticks and the rice bowl, the thick, dark pottery of the bowl making a dull thud. While he waited for everyone else to finish dinner, he tried to look unconcerned and relaxed, even though he felt unexpectedly eager. He was pleased with himself. Tomorrow he would leave, but today he would do as he said he would, and tell a story. It was better anyway, Rindy thought. He wouldn't want to walk at night with the wind crying and moaning above him. Paige said, looking at him from the corner of her eye. "Rindy, it almost seems like you want to tell a story." Rindy looked away as if he were caught stealing. He quickly sipped his empty teacup, trying to look nonchalant. "If you're ready," Madame Chang said, smiling, "we are willing to listen." Mr. Shan and the toad seemed to nod in unison, and even Master Chow, giving up on his feigned indifference, looked up with interest. Rindy put down his cup and smiled in spite of himself. He took a deep breath and began his story. The story of the 3 questions. Duke Jay did as he promised. He spoke of Magistrate Tiger to the imperial family with glowing words, and before long, Magistrate Tiger's dreams began to come true. As the summer was ending, he received an invitation that was awe-inspiring. It was from the imperial palace, and invited him to come up to Emperor's mid-autumn moon festivities. From that moment, Magistrate Tiger's home became a hectic typhoon. Magistrate Tiger's demanding roars echoed without stop as new green robe was made and embroidered. Costly gifts, sculptures of jade and gold were inspected, and fine horses were groomed. Everyone and everything was so full of activity that it was with great surprise to the children one day when their father called them. "Children are supposed to be good at riddles," he said as they bowed at his feet. "If you have any intelligence at all, you will know the answers to these." The children stared silently at their father and gulped. Magistrate Tiger looked at their fearful faces and made an expression of disdain, as if he had just eaten an unripe plum. "Here's the first question," Magistrate Tiger said. "A thief steals a purse, and a man chases and catches him. However, when the authorities arrive, both men accuse the other of being the thief. Both men are of the same build and height, and bystanders cannot say for certain which is the thief and which is the pursuer. How can you tell?" After a moment, just as Magistrate Tiger was about to sigh with impatience, the boy stepped forward. "I would have the 2 men race," the boy said, trying to keep his voice from quivering. "And the loser is the thief, for if the pursuer was able to catch the thief, he must be the faster runner of the 2. Magistrate Tiger looked at his son keenly and nodded. "Good," he said, and before the children could feel relief or pride, he continued. "This is the second question," Magistrate Tiger said. "A single almond is given to a family of 99 members. How can you share that almond evenly?" The boy gave his sister a furtive glance, but she was already stepping forward with bright eyes. "I would boil the almond in water and make it into almond tea, and then all can have a cup. Magistrate Tiger sniffed in a satisfied manner. "The last question," he announced. "A pestilence of snails has come to a village. One man decides that the best way to get rid of the snails in his garden was to throw the snails into his neighbor's garden. Unfortunately, the neighbor also had the same idea, and the snails began to multiply in both gardens. Before long, the two families were fighting. How do you settle this dispute fairly?" There was a long silence. Both children looked helplessly at each other. Neither had any idea of an answer. Finally, their father looked at them with disgust. "I see you are as feeble-minded as I feared," he said with a scorn that stung more than a blow. His voice began to rise as his customary roar emerged. He threw up his arms, and the green silk of his sleeves whipping at them. "You're a disgrace to your ancestry. The blood of the great ruler and the hero pumps in us, and you cannot answer a simple question. Out! Out of my sight!" His children fled, and soon found themselves, as they often did, clinging to their mother for comfort. "Why is he angry all the time?" the boy asked. Even though his sister was a year older than he, she was smaller, and he often felt protective of her. He could feel her trembling like a baby rabbit, and he put his hand on her arm. "He's not angry," their mother said unconvincingly. "It's just the way he must act to accomplish things." "Why?" the boy said, scowling. "For what?" Their mother was quiet a moment. "For you," she said finally. "He does all this for you." The boy did not understand this either. But both children were glad that their father soon seemed to forget about them. Instead, as the days came closer to the mid-autumn moon festivities, Magistrate Tiger seemed more like a powerful storm that was best kept away from. When he finally left for the imperial palace, his children sighed with relief. But the children were curious when Magistrate Tiger returned with an extra litter carried by strong men. The sedan they dragged did not hold a person, but a giant, well-wrapped package. Magistrate Tiger himself was carrying a silk box as if it were a dragon's pearl. The children looked at each other, then ran so they could peek in through the window of their father's formal chamber. As the men carefully unloaded the package, Duke Jay arrived. "Ah, friend," Duke Jay said warmly, "how happy I am for you. The Emperor was much impressed by your wisdom and intelligence. Are these your prizes?" Yes, Magistrate Tiger purred. "This is what the Emperor gave me for answering the first question correctly." And he opened the silk box and took out a blue, white, and gold rice bowl on a gold stand. He held it with an air of awe, and Duke Jay gave a sigh of appreciation. "Ah, the finest porcelain in the land, brought out especially for the Emperor's moon festivities," Duke Jay said. "Made by perhaps the best potter in history as well. See the ancient rabbit motif? It is the same bowl as that the first emperors ate from. Priceless, amazing piece." By then, the men had unwrapped the other package. It was an enormous gang. The giant porcelain bowl was really a tub, almost as high as Magistrate Tiger's shoulders and twice as wide. Painted on its surface, graceful blue fish and lotus flowers seemed to weave together in a silent dance. Magistrate Tiger carefully placed the bowl on the shelf behind him, and then stroked the gang gently. "And the gang! Made to be an indoor fish pond," Duke Jay said. "I was so pleased when you answered the second question and won this. It's perfect for you. Now you'll be able to entertain the fish during the winter months as well." "Also the finest porcelain," Magistrate Tiger said in a gratified voice. "Have you ever seen a gang this size? It's so exquisite and thin. Ah, they are both truly wondrous gifts. But no more than you deserve, Duke Jay said. You answered those questions magnificently. Determined the thief by running the race. Ha! Share an almond by making it into tea. Ha! You answered the Emperor's questions so quickly and brilliantly that it was almost as if you knew what the questions were going to be ahead of time. Ah, Magistrate Tiger said darkly. If I had known the questions ahead of time, I would have been able to answer the Emperor's last question. My dear friend, Duke Jay said, the Emperor has asked the question of the snail to dispute every year at the moon festivities. No one has ever answered it. Neighbors throwing snails into each other's gardens. And how would anyone solve that fairly? I think it's an impossible question. Perhaps, Magistrate Tiger conceded. The boy began to sputter. Determine the thief, sharing an almond, fighting over snails. His sister quickly pulled him away from the window before he exploded. Those were our answers, he cried as soon as they were out of earshot. He found out the questions ahead of time and used our answers. Shh, his sister said, glancing over her shoulder. It doesn't matter anyway. What do you mean? The boy said, still outraged. It was my answer. Well, if everything he does is for you, she said, then it's okay that he took your answer, right? The boy was silent. Did his father roar and trick and lie for him? He felt a mixture of confusion and resentment. Well, it doesn't seem like he does it for me, the boy said sullenly. He does, his sister said, and she sounded more hopeful than sure. Another very interesting story, Rindy, Madame Chang said, as she nodded slowly. Yes, Pei almost shouted. Too bad the third question was impossible. We could really use the answer. It would solve everything. What do you mean? Rindy said. Master Chow coughed. He began. No, it's the whole reason why you hate the Yans, and the Yans hate us, Pei said, ignoring her father. Because our ancestors threw snails into each other's gardens. The fight between you and Widow Yan is over snails, Rindy said incredulously. Master Chow coughed again. It's not exactly that, he said. Yes, it is, Pei interrupted, her bitterness giving her the courage to speak before her father in a way Rindy had never seen before. If it wasn't for the snails, then we could be friends with Widow Yan and Jiming. You and Jiming wouldn't have argued over him marrying Mei Lin, and he wouldn't have run away, and it's all because no one can answer that silly snail question. I know someone who can answer it, Madame Chang said, before Master Chow could interrupt with indignation, and Rindy could show even more surprise. Everyone stared at her. Who? Rindy asked. Mr. Shan, Madame Chang said. They all turned to Mr. Shan, open-mouthed. Mr. Shan seemed oblivious to the conversation, playing with the toad again. Madame Chang gently touched his shoulder and looked straight into his eyes. Mr. Shan, she said, do you know how to settle the problem of the snails? He looked at her, and again his eyes seemed to clear, as if like a sky after a storm. Of course, Mr. Shan said. Chapter 18. Master Chow, full of skepticism and embarrassment, snorted and left the room before even hearing Mr. Shan's answer. Good, Mr. Shan said. If we do it, it's better he doesn't know. Are we going to do it? We are going to do it, right? Pei said, hopping up and down in excitement. Oh, geez, that was the wrong voice. Rindy was surprised to see Madame Chang looking at him. Are we, Rindy? She asked him. Night had come, and already the moans were echoing in Rindy's ears. The sounds were pleading and begging. And Rindy could feel Pei's hopeful eyes upon him. Madame Chang's steady gaze refused to release him, and Rindy could not say no. With a silent sigh, he nodded. He would stay until they settled the problem of the snails. What was a few more days? Yes, Rindy said. We'll do it. Madame Chang smiled, and a look, was it relief, flashed through her. Did she know? Rindy thought. Did she know he was planning to leave? And why did that matter if he stayed? The sky groaned in answer, and Rindy wrinkled his brow. However, for the next few days, Rindy had no time to wonder. Although his nights were still full of restless cries, he quickly forgot about them during the day as he, Pei, Madame Chang, and Mr. Shan rushed in the hot sun like busy ants. So when Rindy walked around the wall and to Widow Yan's door, he was full of anticipation. The withered yellow grass crunched like paper offerings under his feet, and Rindy realized that this was the first time he'd ever knocked on Widow Yan's door. Widow Yan, with Mei Lan behind her, looked at Rindy in surprise. The sun cast down harsh shadows upon Widow Yan's tired face, and the worried wrinkle between her eyebrows seemed a deep, dark scar. Suddenly, Rindy saw that life had not been easy for Widow Yan and Mei Lan, two women living alone in a poor village. If he sent you to complain, Widow Yan began, you tell him. Please, Rindy interrupted. Where'd you come for tea? Over to the inn, Widow Yan said. I wouldn't go to Chow Inn if... No, Rindy interrupted again. Just to over there, and he beckoned with his arm. A table straddled the lowest part of the crumbling wall, and the light of the sun directly overhead burned its bare top. The chair rested near the half of the table in Widow Yan's yard, and the other chair waited on the other half in Master Chow's yard. The figure of Master Chow, being pulled by Paillet, was walking toward it. Widow Chang gave Rindy a questioning look and an amused sniff, but she took his arm as he led her to the table. Mei Lan followed, shooting Paillet curious looks as they came closer. Paillet, having gotten her father to sit down, grinned at her. What is this? Widow Yan demanded as she let herself be seated. The sharp lines of her face seemed to cut at the air as much as her words. How should I know? Master Chow retorted, wiping the dampness from his face, as red as the cinnabar decorations on his belt. My daughter just dragged me out here for tea, she says. Before Widow Yan could respond, Madame Chang appeared, flanked by Mr. Shan, who was carrying a full tray. Welcome, Madame Chang said, as if they were sitting at a banquet table in the Emperor's palace instead of their dry, dusty yards in the scorching sun. Thank you both for honoring us with your presence. Her gracious words and manner shamed both Widow Yan and Master Chow, and an awkward truce was silently agreed on. Rindy couldn't help smiling to himself as he watched them refrain from making insults to each other for the first time. Madame Chang quickly sat down, teacups, plates, and chopsticks before them. She poured the tea, steam misting as the amber liquid filled the rosewood-colored cups. The familiar fragrance wafted in the air and calmed Widow Chan and Master Chow, so Widow Yan and Master Chow, even as they began to flush in the heat. They sipped wordlessly, the black tops of their heads blazing, but the space between them did not seem unfriendly. However, the silence continued, and Pei's second smile at Mei Lan was less bright. Pei and Rindy slowly brought the small dishes of pork dumplings and fried taro cakes. They looked at each other furtively as Pei put down the last dish, which seemed to be filled with small, deep black pearls sprinkled with jade circles of sliced green onions. What are these? Master Chow said, reaching for them with his chopsticks. As he chewed and swallowed, his eyebrows raised, but before he could stop himself, he gasped, "Delicious!" Curious, Widow Yan took some, and found herself closing her eyes in delight. "It is delicious," she said. "It could be served to the Emperor himself." "So you can agree on some things," Madame Chang said. Her words reminded Widow Yan and Master Chow of their dislike for each other, and the stony stillness returned. "If I understand correctly, your first disagreement was over snails." The silence snapped. "If your great-grandfather had not thrown the snails," Widow Yan spat. "My great-grandfather," Master Chow bellowed. "It was your ancestor who threw the snails." "It was a plague of snails," Widow Yan said, "and he ruined our garden." "Your snails ruined our garden," Master Chow said bitterly, "and they're still here. Those disgusting things. No good for anything." "Other than causing a quarrel that breaks your family apart?" Madame Chang asked quietly. Her words were spoken like raindrops, but they fell upon Master Chow and Widow Yan like an avalanche of stones, forcing them to see thoughts and memories that had been hidden. Insults and words disappeared, and Master Chow found himself thinking of Jie Ming, whom he had tried hard not to think of since that last slammed door. Master Chow looked down at his teacup, where one drop of liquid sat at the bottom, like a lone tear. Widow Yan glanced at Mei Lan, standing beside her. How pale Mei Lan was, frail and thin, as if the sunlight could be seen through her. When was the last time Mei Lan had truly smiled? The sun shifted over them as if trying to expose a shared secret. Finally Master Chow and Widow Yan looked up. Their eyes met, grief-stricken mirrors of each other's. "The snails are good for something else also," Mr. Shan said unexpectedly. Master Chow's and Widow Yan's sorrowful eyes turned to bafflement, for Mr. Shan was looking at them with an amused expression, like a boy watching small dogs play. "Those snails," he cackled, "those snails are also good to eat." Rindy and Pei began to laugh as Master Chow and Widow Shan continued to stare. Their laughter had just reached a hysterical pitch when Pei gestured to the food they had eaten. "The snails!" she giggled. Between giggles she gasped, "You just ate them!" "Those are snails?" Master Chow said, slowly understanding. He took another mouthful, chewing thoughtfully. His face brightened, and his mind began to move with ideas, like a clicking of Bacchus beads. "If I could serve this, I could add this to my tofu recipe," Widow Yan said. The corners of her mouth began to creep upward as she thought. You could sell it at the inn," Mr. Shan said, with a jovial wave of his arm. They looked at him blankly, and he laughed as if they had told a joke. "The inn sells Widow Yan's food, then Master Chang gets more customers, and Widow Yan makes more money. Both help each other, and the snails are the best things to grow in the garden after all." Question answered. Mr. Shan continued to laugh to himself. He took the toad out of his pocket and began to walk away. Madame Ching smiled and joined him, leaving the others to watch with hopeful eyes. Master Chow and Widow Yan looked at each other sheepishly. After a moment, Master Chow shrugged, and Widow Yan gave him a small wry smile. Then Master Chan poured Widow Yan a cup of tea. To be continued.